discuss that story a bit further. We're now joined by Mr. Webster Griffin Tarpley, who is an author and historian who's joining us now via satellite from Washington. Mr. Tarpley, thanks a lot for joining us. Now, who is responsible, Mr. Tarpley, for this rising extremism and violence in Syria?
The responsibility goes to the NATO-backed, NATO-supplied death squads. There are about 300 of them, and I think the lesson of the past several weeks now is that these death squads are militarily defeated as a conventional military force. They cannot hold neighborhoods of cities. They cannot hold territory. The only tactics open to them are massacres, atrocities, such as the shocking war crime that we've just seen, assassinations of government officials, large car bombs near mosques and other public places, and they've even clashed now with the Kurds. And interestingly, the Kurds seem to have got the better of that fight. So the only hope they have is to keep generating headlines with mass killing. The Western media, of course, tend to blame any mass killing on the Syrian government, but keep the headlines alive so that eventually some kind of foreign intervention can be arranged. One thing that we've heard is that the CIA and related people have been telling these death squads, these killers, hold on until after the U.S. elections and help will be on its way, that there's things the U.S. will do for them after the November 6th vote that can't be done now. We now see what it is. There'll be a meeting in Qatar next week with Ambassador Ford, that is Ambassador Ford, the expert in deploying death squads. The U.S. is junking the Syrian National Council, regarding them as a failure, and setting up a new puppet group in which the death squads will be heavily represented. Hillary Clinton in the Balkans last week said it would be the armed opposition that would have the main role. So you can see what it is. It'll be Al-Qaeda in all kinds of disguises, and that will become the new U.S. vehicle. And with that, they hope to declare some kind of a corridor or free zone in the northern part of Syria along the Turkish border. This is a strategy of weakness and desperation, I would say.
Mr. Tarpley, what is then the U.S. plan, or Western plan, if I could call it that, for all these foreigners who are fighting in Syria?
Well, the foreigners have been brought in from Libya. We've got reports of Syrian rebels who sound like they're from South London. They're speaking South Cockney. So we can see that the terrorist pool for much of the world has now been drawn into Syria. Casualties among these rebels seem to be very heavy, not just lately, but consistently along the line. It would be interesting to see a count of the casualties, specifically of the rebel groups, because they're being subjected to rather large attrition. Of course, the NATO powers don't care about this. This is simply cannon fodder. Erdogan doesn't care. It's just cannon fodder. There's a difference of opinion about the future. Erdogan says, stick with the Syrian National Council. The U.S. says, no, dump them. Let's get the death squads more in command. So I don't think there is a future for them, except their orders are to keep killing, never compromise, no truces, no pause in the killing, and hopefully then they think that they can get some incident that can be used as a pretext for foreign intervention. And again, it's a strategy of acute weakness.
All right, we'll have to leave it there for now. That was Mr. Webster Griffin Tarpley, author and historian, speaking to us live from Washington. Sir, we do appreciate your insight here on Press TV.
Thank you.
That's right. Keep up the killing. No compromise. No compromise. That's the saying, and that's the motto of the Free Syrian Terrorist Army. This is GGN. Today is Friday, November 2nd, 2012. I'm Darko, and my website is ggnonline.com, and on YouTube, ddarko2012, and my backup, ddarko2013. So I just covered recently about how the Gulf Cooperation Council and that basically these Gulf dictatorships that the West backs are drawing up a plan and drawing up cash to get this thing moving as far as the regime change goes in Syria. So now we have this news that comes out about how they're going to set up a new government. So West backs Qatari plan to unify Syrian opposition. Britain and U.S. behind drive to create council to represent Syrian rebels, but Russia and main exile opposition groups oppose it. Well, why? Because it's going to end up like Libya and And that's just one of the examples of what's going to happen here. They're going to look back and say, whoa, we should have had more troops there, right? We should have had more security. U.S. plans to establish new Syrian opposition force in Qatar meeting. So it goes on and it says that a new Syrian opposition force with its Secretary of State rejecting existing opposition leaders as a bunch of out-of-touch exiles that should be replaced by a group representing active insurgents, i.e. terrorists. So they want to put the terrorists in control there. Clinton's also warning of extremists trying to hijack the Syrian revolution, the quote, hijack. So that's assuming that they weren't there to begin with. Many in the region are justifiably skeptical that the U.S. isn't the one trying to hijack the revolution. Part of creating this new opposition group inside Syria, they say that they want people that have basically been in Syria for a while. They're saying they want people that haven't been inside Syria for 20, 30, 40 years. Well, unfortunately, most of them are foreigners, like Tarpley was just talking about. And locals on the ground have reported in Syria about that, about different dialects and stuff like that. So, that's right, foreign jihadist fighters, many of whom have committed war crimes and are linked with al-Qaeda, have been increasingly flooding into Syria, and the great bulk of the rebel fighters across the country is Islamists seeking to set up an Islamic State post-Assad that would potentially be exclusivist towards the country's main ethnic and religious sects. So the Syrian rebels are comfortable with receiving aid from the West, including CIA and intelligence, Stinger missiles, but they're not comfortable with Obama picking their leaders. These dictates are not acceptable to the Syrian people anymore, or the terrorists that invaded their country. From yesterday, from Land Destroyer, U.S. to focus exclusively on arming al-Qaeda in Syria. U.S. dumps Syrian proxy political front in latest move to accelerate long-stalled regime change. Really, like I said, it's Qatari-backed Gulf states. And it's in the West's interest, so it says the Washington Post also indicates that de facto administrative zones are being set up along the Turkish-Syrian border with non-lethal assistance provided by the United States, France, and other like-minded governments. And Syrian rebels arm Palestinians to fight existing Palestinian factions. The Free Syrian Army throws weapons at refugee camp hoping to claim control. So it goes on, they've already brought a number of factions into its midst, the Iraqis, Kurds, Lebanese, but can Palestinians become another faction at war with itself? The rebel Free Syrian Army seems to think so. So they say that they began arming sympathetic Palestinians, quote sympathetic, in the refugee camp of Yarmouk. The group they're arming is called the Storm Brigade, or Lawa al-Asafah, and it goes on, they're trying to pick a fight with the existing Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which currently holds the camp. They accused this group of harassing rebel forces and supporting Assad. Then, still with Israel and Palestine, Israel admits assassinating Palestinian leader in 1988. Much of you probably heard this, but I'll just cover it in this report. Israel ordered Mossad to kill this Khalid Wazir, raising questions about the alleged assassination of Yasser Arafat. So Israel's finally admitted, after more than 2 decades of secrecy, that it ordered the Israeli spy agency Mossad to carry out the assassination of the Palestinian leader. Just recently, I think they were talking about plutonium or something possibly being found in Arafat's body and his corpse, whatever. So, and yeah, there's some atrocities going on in Syria right now by those rebels, whatever, and terrorists. Because there was a video, I couldn't even watch it. This one video shows Syrian insurgents executing soldiers. I mean, it's weird because they're saying God is great, chanting God is great, and they're calling the Syrian soldiers and government forces and police dogs. And the way they're acting like animals, dude. It's really weird. U.S.-backed terrorists mass murder unarmed civilians in Syria. Washington Post claims, quote, soldiers were executed. Terrorists in video clearly referred to victims as civilian. So, Shabi, they're probably militia. Victims had no weapons, uniforms, or IDs indicating they were soldiers. So, the war crime was reported on by the Washington Post, but deceitfully and purposely spun and shrugged off. In the Post article, Syrian rebels execute unarmed government soldiers, dozens killed in fighting. They're calling them the Shabiya of Assad, the dogs. And it says the Shabiya, it refers to the alleged civilian militias organized locally to resist the terrorists entering into and attempting to overrun neighborhoods. The term Shabiya has become analogous of the Western media's use of the term African mercenaries in Libya during the NATO destabilization and regime change operations in 2011. These African mercenaries were lynched, beheaded, shot, burned, hacked to pieces, just as terrorists are now doing to suspected Shabiya across Syria. So, you know, they're going to include what? Civilians. So yeah, there's the thing. You can go in there. Links will be posted in YouTube's video description. You can check out that video. But it was 28 Syrians that were basically killed. The plight of Syrians Christians, I've covered this before. More reports coming out, though, and this is for mainstream, the Independent. We left Homs because they were trying to kill us. In civil war, they've tried to stay neutral, but despite this, many are now facing persecution and death. Some in the church are adamant about who is to blame. Says not just an influx of jihadists and the rebels in the last 6 months. There is for him in so many situations the Middle East a specter of a hidden hand. I think the situation is being manipulated by the USA and maybe Israel. They want this to happen, he insisted. So this archbishop says, I've raised this with officials in the West. They must bring peace. The jihadists will not stop here. The war will spread to Europe. What will England be like in 15 years? I haven't been there personally, but I've read articles and, you know, just their most recent video that I showed about the Italian priest saying when he was there was more foreigners than ethnic British. So they said our country's being destroyed. The fact is we can only go back if Assad wins. I don't like saying this. We don't want the regime to stay as it is, but we will be safer under them. So far, they've been neutral. And Jordan, remember, just recently I talked about one of the jihadists that were flooding in or flowing into Syria were the Jordanians. And U.S. found a new strategic ally in the Middle East. It says, see also this link, U.S. awards $26 million for Jordan's new air control system. Pentagon officials stress that Jordan is considered as a key U.S. ally in the Arab world. Advanced American technology will allow the country to defend its airspace and provide air sovereignty. American military specialists, along with the British counterparts, regularly assist Jordan in enhancing their military. Now with what's going on in Syria and the spillover, the aid to Jordan by the allies' country increased. Of course, like with Turkey and that too. Fighting erupts between Syrian rebels and Kurds. I just covered this recently. I actually posted in the title about how the tension between the Kurds and the Syrian rebels was getting to a boiling point. Nearly a week of fighting between the Kurds and Arab rebels in northern Syria risks opening a new front in an already bloody battle for the control of the country, underscoring the complexity of a conflict that threatens to ignite sectarian ethnic tensions across the region. Threatens? I think it's happened already. Director of Middle East and North African Program, the International Crisis Group, yeah, it sounds like a nice little think tank, says this is setting the stage for a conflict that is going to come. So another conflict, right? And they were referring to Kurdistan and how they aspire for their autonomy and perhaps independence. And the Kurdistani MP says our coalition will not participate in political majority government. He says Iraq is in the process of building, and he says that pushing a political majority government is not new, and they are just arguments and serious obstructions to begin repairing the political process. He says every time the state of law coalition is being asked to push this, they threaten and vow to form a majority government, describing this action as misplaced because the country had suffered greatly from the rules of central governments. Remember, I was just talking about, too, about how the contracts with, I think it was Shell, Royal Dutch Shell, was basically axed. It was stopped in Iraq and part of Kurdistan. It says here, Iraqi Kurds defy Baghdad and export own oil. So there you go. Iraq's Kurds are exporting oil independently of Baghdad, fueling a political battle that may stem the central government's strategy of boosting oil production. Yeah, that's what I was saying. They actually were supposed to be the third largest oil producer in the world, and then all of a sudden they just canceled it. They say it is fraught with political risk and may well mark a defining moment in post-Saddam Hussein Iraq. The landlocked Kurdish enclave borders Turkey, which seeks to establish itself as a key energy hub between East and West, and has offered the KRG, Kurdistan government, to build pipelines to carry its oil and gas to the Mediterranean that would allow the Kurds to bypass the state-owned network controlled by Baghdad. Thus, these stories. Obama's Iraq ambassador says, I wanted troops to stay in Iraq, and it affirms what Obama has tried to downplay, the regime's push to stay in Iraq. He said the more troops you keep in Iraq, as far as I was concerned, the better, as long as the Iraqis went along with it. The quote, what, training mission. It says that the Obama regime tried desperately to keep thousands of troops there, perhaps indefinitely, but when this effort failed, he fell back on the Bush regime's agreement to pull all troops out by 2011. Speaking of keeping the troops in Iraq, it's time to bomb Iraq again. install a regime change that is more obedient, according to a New York Times article, Time to Get Tough on Iraq. Thank you.